All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, April 28th, and this is the spring meeting of the Policy Committee. I want to thank our committee members and our student representative for joining us. We also have Dr. Johnston and Dr. Lutz with us to speak specifically to the two policies on the agenda. So we just have two items, and then we have several items for discussion that do not need to go forward from this meeting, but do want to get the board's input. So we're going to start with policy 201, admission of students. And we have a few minor changes to that policy, and I'll bring the policy up onto screen. But Dr. Johnson, maybe you can give a little background while I'm doing that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I appreciate your time this afternoon. We reviewed policy 201 for those of you who are longtime members of this committee. Recall that in our comprehensive review, we reviewed policy 201 in February of 2022. That final versions were created. At that time, we made a key change to the policy of admissions to students, and we made the determination to move our start date for new students, for children coming into school. At that time, our policy spoke to September 1st as the cutoff, and you must be 5 by September 1st. And we moved that decision to September 15th. So the new cutoff was September 15th. That put us in alignment with, at that time, a number of families had been requesting early admission. We felt like it put us in sort of the norm with the rest of the county in Montgomery County. And we felt like it provided us clarity on who and what kinds of experiences we could expect for our students. But we also then took away the early admissions opportunity. We no longer created exceptions for students who had a birthday between September 2nd and the end of the month. However, like any good cutoff date, naturally there are still families who would like to see changes be put into place and request exceptions. And so I have received several exception requests this year. And as a result, Dr. Lutz and I had a conversation about what we should do and how to respond, because we felt clear that we didn't want to do one-offs. Oh, for you, we'll make an exception, but that's not really our policy. Like, we didn't want to bring those kinds of requests forward. Instead, we thought it was really important to be consistent and understand why it is we set the parameters where we did. And maybe this was an opportunity to look at it again. Dr. Lutz was not part of our team at the time that we put that in place. So it was primarily from my own experience and my own research at that time. Dr. Lutz brought a different lens. So it was important for us to come together and reconsider. Residency and admissions falls into her office. So she and I looked at lots of different things. We looked at the local practices. We surveyed our colleagues across Montgomery County. We looked at what ends up being slightly confusing, which we'll come back to later, which is that Pennsylvania Department of Education has two separate documents, one that identifies students may not start before their fourth birthday, and another that says they shouldn't start until after their you can't start before your 4 years, 7 months at the cutoff. So there's discrepancy even within the Commonwealth's differences. Hi, Lee, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to ask, is it possible just to make it bigger on the screen?
Oh.
Thank you.
It is hard to read, Lee. I can appreciate that.
I haven't got my glasses on.
So at any rate, it's actually a really brief policy, and it basically says, here's when you can come to school. You have to be this age. Here we go. So at any rate, we looked at it, and then we got into enrollment trends. Like, if we were to change our cutoff date to a different time, how would that, if we broadly changed it, what impact might that have? And what impact to equity might that bring for us? Like, which kinds of kids are going to be served well by that? Which kinds of kids might not be served well by that? And how do we want to proceed? So we looked into it, and ultimately what we learned is that while there are 22 school districts in Montgomery County, one of them is Bryn Athyn, which operates as its own entity and has its own interpretation of the way in which they intersect with school regulations. So excluding them, 100% of the school districts have a cutoff date of either August 31st, September 1st, or September 15th. So we are right in the mix with everybody else. No one has a start date after that timeline, even though PDE does leave that to local control. But Bryn Athyn says you have to be at the age of a beginner, which is ultimately first grade, which lends me to the idea that they probably do not operate a kindergarten program in Bryn Athyn. That's sort of what came to be. 19 of those 21 school districts do not have any provisions in their policy procedure or in practice, according to what they told us, to allow early admissions. If it says that the start date, the cutoff date is the cutoff date, that is a hard and fast rule, except for in 2 school districts, Pottstown and Hatboro-Horsham, both of which operate district-run preschool and pre-K programs. So it's a direct feed from their preschool and pre-K into an early admission. So it's their own kids coming in as a part of a pre-K program, which, as you well know, we don't operate. Ultimately, one of the major concerns we continue to have is the research still suggests that the older you are coming into kindergarten, the more developed social and academic skills you will have, and that ultimately that will serve you well through life. While there's some discrepancy about whether that truly plays out as you get older and older, early on, it's foundationally well-grounded. Additionally, one of the things that we learned in the research of sort of the greater impact is Head Start and pre-K counts, which are the at-risk programs for children from a variety of socioeconomic requirements for those programs. Once the school district establishes the start date for kindergarten, depends on when you can enroll in that program. So if we were to change the start date to December 1st, and that you had to be 5 by December 1st, so you would start as a 4-year-old, every other 4-year-old who lives in Springfield Township who wanted to go to pre-K counts or Head Start wouldn't be able to because they could come to kindergarten. So it would compel families who might need developmentally appropriate holistic early care to not have access to those programs to come into a more structured kindergarten program, even if they weren't ready. Does that make sense? Okay. And so additionally, for students who perhaps are not content with their early intervention services being provided by Montgomery County IU, or feel like their child would do better if they were in a school district program to receive special education, they too might be motivated to transition early to the school district program and miss out on needed holistic early care services. And so ultimately, Dr. Lutz and I reviewed this with Dr. Yannicone and thought about whether or not we thought it was a good idea to make any changes to our policy. And ultimately, we actually don't think it is. We think it would cause more harm to more students if we were to consider a change in the process. And given that none of our colleagues in the surrounding Montgomery County area are considering such a change, nor would they be compelled to change it if we changed, we didn't think it was there wasn't enough benefit to the 1 or 2 children a year who ask for this early enrollment. The one thing we did recognize is that the way our policy read is that you could go get a kindergarten program anywhere and then come and transition into first grade, which ultimately still creates that disparity. So one of the only change we are recommending that we make to the policy is to tighten up that you actually need to have participated in a state approved kindergarten program or have moved into the area. So we wanted to tighten that up because ultimately we believe that this provides a much more equitable approach. It's consistent for everyone in our township and in our school district. It ensures that our students have the opportunity to engage in appropriate, holistic early learning for their 4th and beginning of their 5th year. And then as they're a solid 5-year-old, they could enter into our kindergarten program. And so that is our recommendation to all of you. And that is why sort of all you see is a tiny little strike through. But I wanted you to know we contemplated a much bigger request or a much bigger possibility and ultimately shifted to a very tiny thought. Dr. Lutz, did I miss anything in our review?
No, I think you captured everything.
Dr. Yannicone, did I miss anything in our conversation? Okay. Dr. Aberly.
So if a student had a September birthday, but had completed a full-time kindergarten program, I have an example of that. Would the school feel compelled or not to enroll them in first grade, or would they automatically go into kindergarten? Because that's a situation that happened with our family. And I don't disagree with that at all, but I can see maybe that question being asked.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's what we want to take a look at is that it depends on the kind of kindergarten program that had been engaged. There are early learning kindergarten programs, and there are school district, school approved day schools where a child may have lived in another school district in another
Yeah.
part of Pennsylvania or potentially another state where the rules are different.
Outside the state, yeah.
To us, that was that's kind of what we wanted to allow for. We wanted to try to not allow for, you could go buy kindergarten at somewhere and then come bring it and then go into first grade. Like, we thought that was sort of inequitable. So we were trying to find some language that would provide some consistency.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a great interpretation.
Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, so along Dr. Aberles, I guess, what is the opportunity for parents and or students to circumvent this this policy? So, for instance, along Dr. Aberles, suggesting that, you know, if they paid for school or kindergarten and or, you know, just whatever variable that they could come up with to circumvent this, what, I guess, what's the opportunity? Does anyone explore that? Or
yes, it happens. I mean, it currently is under the current policy, you can do that. You can go purchase or go take your child to a private school for kindergarten, bring us the grade, and then into first grade they go. So strictly speaking, there is a way through it.
Okay.
We're trying to be tighter on how we would review that and under what rationale we would review that, but it would need to be a state approved kindergarten program.
Thank you for your response.
For both, well, for all members of the policy committee, I do think it's worthwhile to note that in reviewing this and making a decision about whether or not flexibility should exist and to what extent, if so, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Lutz have done an extensive amount of research on the outcomes for students who begin kindergarten earlier than the norm. And perhaps you could speak to that briefly, just to explain sort of what went into your thinking around whether or not exceptions to the rule are to the benefit of the student.
Beyond sort of what I had said earlier around the idea that the older you are, the more successful you tend to be because you have stronger social, emotional, and academic skills. I think there are students who have the social, emotional skills, but not the academic, or the academic, but not the social, emotional. And it's the combination of the two that are most successful. And while there may be children for whom are the exception to those rules, by making any changes in our policy applies to all children in our school district, not just one-offs. And so that was our concern, is that we have a systematic response and not every year it's a little bit different, inconsistent approach. We didn't believe that that was equitable because it assumed a lot of things that we thought created a real disparate approach in our enrollment of students.
It's hard to pick a date, and there's always going to be somebody whose birthday is the 16th of September. And then if you pick the 20th, there's going to be somebody who's the 21st. Like, there always has to be a line in the sand, right? So I think, you know, I think knowing that maybe there would be some, like, I don't know how you would justify an exception, but I think this is pretty strong in, especially in terms of having that state, like, qualified kindergarten, it's going to kind of like really limit those situations where it's like, oh, my child did kindergarten, but it was a private daycare. That probably is going to be a very different scenario. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many families or kids actually kind of do try and circumvent the policy.
It's very few, as Dr. Johnson indicated. It's very few.
I'm sure it is,
and I think, you know, and look, in fairness to families, yeah, we understand that families are looking to do what's best for their children.
Absolutely.
As a district, we want to make sure that our policy supports consistent practices and is in line with our vision with regard to equity. And I think one of the areas that you heard Dr. Johnson speak about with regard to equity is the whole concept of access to Head Start and early intervention. That is critical for so many families, and we don't want to do anything with regard to policy that would create barriers unnecessarily for families who really need those services. And so we feel like this is an appropriate minor change. You can see there's just one minor change, taking out the by letter or by records, so that we need to see the actual records of the students kindergarten. And other than that, it's just a whole, it's a updated review and maintenance of the existing dates. Okay, and that's based upon updated research conducted by the Office of Teaching and Learning, just to make sure we're continuing to be consistent with our neighbors, and we are. So we'd like to move this policy forward and this is a minor change, so it would just be a one read on next Tuesday, May 6th, and then it would go into effect.
Looks good.
Looks good to me too.
Yes, I'm fine with it. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
all.
terrific. So then I'm going to go to the second policy, which is something that was recommended by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and I'll make this larger as well. So this policy, and I would say that of anyone in the room, Dr. Lutz is the person who would have the greatest amount of attention to this particular policy. But essentially, there's been a recommendation from PSBA and from our solicitor's firm that we should adopt the new regulations on pregnant students and ways in which school districts can support pregnant students. And so we just pulled the full policy as it has been drafted from PSBA, and we've put this here in front of you to take a look at. We would check every box here to provide all of these as reasonable modifications for a student who was attending school while pregnant. So breaks during class, to make sure that they are eating and drinking and using the restroom, intermittent absences in order to attend necessary medical appointments, voluntary leave of absence, if they had perhaps preeclampsia or other kind of medical condition leading up to pregnancy or to delivery, access to online or homebound instruction, changes in their schedule or course sequence to accommodate adjustments to their needs, extensions of time for coursework or rescheduling of tests or exams if they needed that, student flexibility in whether they sit or stand. Anyone who's been pregnant probably understands that one, the ability, to get up and move around if you need to, access to appropriate facilities for lactation and counseling. And so we believe this is a perfectly reasonable policy. We do not have frequent need to address this policy with our student body. However, we want to make sure that we're ready. And so this policy, we would just check each of those boxes so that they're all options for accommodations. And then we would put this, now this is a new policy, and so it would require 2 readings. So we would do the 2 readings in May, and then it would go into effect in June, following the May 19th meeting. Technically, it would go into effect May 20th. Are there any questions? Or Dr. Lutz, if there's anything else you think is relevant to share, certainly, but any questions or concerns about this policy? I see brain shaking your head no, and you'd be somebody who'd be in school and meeting with other students who might have these needs for accommodation. And so I appreciate that.
So I have one question, and I did read this ahead of time. So it does talk about like equal access, but what about if a student wants to be like excused from say like physical education, for example? Is it a given that they can just be excused from that and it doesn't even come under this policy, or does it
would actually, that would fall under changes in schedule.
Okay, all right.
So for example, if a student said, I was scheduled for health and physical education in the spring, I'm going to be between, 4 and 9 months pregnant that semester, I'd like to hold off. We could reschedule that for another time. Yeah. Any other questions about this policy? Are you okay with this going forward next week for its first reading?
Yes, I am.
Yep.
I am up.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you. All right. So I'll go back to the agenda, and then the other 2 items, it's been, knock on wood, it's been fairly quiet for policy this winter. There hasn't been a lot that's actually, we had a very busy fall and early winter, but it's been quiet since then. But there are 2 topics, one that was brought forward by our students and one that we want to just follow up on. So the first is there's a student committee for sustainability in the township. And the students involved have asked that we consider a sustainability policy. And this is really to open the discussion today, because the board we would need to do some work. But they asked me to share with you, so I'm sharing, this is Radnor's sustainability goals. And there are renewable energy goals that the school district of Radnor Township has approved previously to sort of communicate to the community what their values are relative to sustainability. It doesn't commit the board to any particular project. For example, it doesn't commit the board to purchasing electric buses, for example, but it does sort of communicate what is the value and mindset and vision of the board relative to sustainability. So I just wanted to bring it forward, and I feel badly. Ari is one of the, our student representative, Ari Schwartzman, is one of the 3 students from the Sustainability Committee who did ask that this be placed on the agenda. And Bryn, I don't know if you want to contribute at all. I know you're not one of the 3 students who initially brought this forward. But for our committee members on the board, they really would like the board to consider whether or not you would feel comfortable drafting something similar or adopting the very same goals. They really liked this language. And so I'm happy to have us have a discussion, and then I can take further action by going back to the Sustainability Committee. We can draft some language if this is something you're interested in bringing to the full board. Just happy to have the discussion today.
I mean, I think it's like a really admirable challenge that the students are putting forward to us. I think one of the important pieces is really having quite strong language around the cost benefit analysis, because I know it's saying here around cost effective, but that could be very much open to interpretation. And obviously we've just approved, the purchase of 2 new school buses, right, which are not electric vehicles or hybrid or anything like that. So, and I know we had a lot of discussion about, could we have electric school buses, but the cost is very prohibitive in terms of, what it costs to keep, maintain, run them, and then obviously the original purchase price of them. So I think I think I would like to see something quite strongly in there around, if we do something like this, I think it should be something we incorporate, but to really have something around cost benefit in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, along with Dr. Everly, I would say where feasible.
Yeah.
Primarily because to Dr. Everly's point, the initial cost might be unattainable, or should I say, we won't be able to make the initial cost, and or I guess the payback, or should I say term of payback, might be too long for us to recoup any sustainable expenditures.
Yeah, I think we
you
ran into
understand,
that, yes, when we were working on the middle school project design plan, and we looked at the possibility of photovoltaic panels. The math just didn't work out to the district's benefit. And so we're doing the geothermal, which we're very happy about. But so yes, I understand sort of a caveat relative to cost and financial position of the district. Other thoughts about any of this language or any of the areas that you would want to make sure were included?
I just wanted to say I'm in agreement with Dr. Everly and Mr. Jordan. Just I think it's something that we should take into account, but I think as a board we have to weigh all of our options. But I do think it's something to help us, like, have a policy to help us be more mindful of making sure we're considering this piece of it.
I appreciate that, Mrs. Hubley. And to be clear, this is actually, Radnor doesn't have a policy. So policy kind of puts you in a much tighter position, whereas to have goals, if the board were to adopt goals, this would be along the lines of sort of a resolution, where the board would agree that this is an area that we want to publicly state is our vision and our commitment, with the caveat of finances or availability of resources. I mean, one of the things we spoke about 2 years ago with regard to the electric buses was the lack of infrastructure, that the federal government simply hadn't put forward enough of an infrastructure plan that would make it workable. So as an example, we didn't want to take a risk on students traveling on an electric bus to a state tournament on the other side of the state and then find out there's nowhere to charge the bus and have it be stranded, and then we have to have kids go, take a diesel bus to go pick them up. And so that was one of the areas of concern we had, because there just hasn't been sufficient investment in infrastructure at a national level to help us to be able to afford this.
How big a school district is Radnor? I don't have a concept.
They're actually not much larger than us. They're
Yeah,
not
Okay.
in,
I would
in
say-
geographic size or
They're comparable.
in an enrollment. They're slightly larger than us in enrollment.
Okay.
Um,
Just thinking about, the other thing that you could include in here is really opportunities to collaborate directly with the township as well.
Okay. Okay. So I can draft something similar and bring it forward to you for consideration, perhaps at our next policy meeting. And then if you like it, then we could bring it forward to the full board. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
what you need. Thank you.
Terrific. All right, and then we just have one further agenda item. And this, you'll see that the AR is not linked here. And I am going to bring it up onto the screen for the purposes of our meeting. But typically administrative regulations are not open to the public. And so they tend to, because they're what administrators are going to do. But policy 907 is our school visitors policy. And let me stop share for just a minute so I can make sure I have the right one coming up. And so I shared this with all of you a little earlier. And so now I should be able to bring it back up. Let me just go back there. Okay. And this one I think is larger print, but please tell me if you can't see it. So these are what our administrative regulations look like. And actually, I'll drop this right here. This was actually, it would be 2025. And so policy 907 school visitors, we made a relatively minor change this winter in order to explain how we're going to interact with law enforcement in the event that they come onto campus. And the administrative regulation was drafted out of that policy, which is linked in the document. And then you can see that there's procedures when we have visitors, that we use the Raptor system. When members of law enforcement are coming for non-emergency situations, how we will address that. And then there's points of contact. And then we get to the area of specific law enforcement situations where they may be producing a warrant. And so we have here, in line with the policy under number 7, that I or my designee will request any paperwork authorizing an agent to make sure that we actually have an appropriate judicial warrant, and that I will speak with our solicitors as needed in order to verify that the paperwork is in order. If I verify that that is the case, then we will proceed. If we find out under number 9 that it is not a valid warrant, we'll deny entrance. And so you'll see here that if it's a valid warrant, we will then comply. And then at the end, you'll see here, there's 2 components that we have been discussing as a team to ensure the safety and security of our students and staff. And so our attorneys have reviewed this language and approved it, believe it is enforceable and compliant with the law. So the administration will facilitate compliance with a lawfully executed judicial order in a reasonable time. The district and building level administration will bring any subject of a warrant to the main office, where any interviews may take place with law enforcement in a private office in the presence of district support personnel. And we have a list there of who those personnel may be. And this could be our local police, or this could be federal law enforcement at other levels. And so in number 11, what we're basically communicating to our administrative team is that we understand our legal obligation to enforce a judicial warrant and to facilitate and comply with that order. And we will do so maintaining the respect, the privacy, and the dignity for each individual student, as we always do, by bringing that student to a private office and then allowing the law enforcement officer access to that student following parental notification at the time. If the parent would like to be present, the parent will certainly be able to do so. But if for some reason the parent is unavailable, we will happily provide another district adult to represent the interest of the student during that interview. And then number 12, there may be occasions when law enforcement will say that there is an immediate threat to the health and safety of our students. And if that is the case, we will initiate the lockdown procedures that we already have in place that students know well, and that will allow us to allow law enforcement to actually enter the building and move through the building in order to help us to eliminate that threat, whatever it is. And so this is also in keeping with our current relationship with law enforcement. And so we wanted to just make sure that we were communicating this language clearly to our administrators, so that everybody is very clear about expectations for policies and practices. This is aligned to policy 907 as it's currently approved. And then obviously this would be in effect immediately, assuming the board feels comfortable with the language. Typically, again, we don't bring this kind of document forward to the policy committee, but we feel given current stress and anxiety around policy 907, and in particular the presence of law enforcement on campuses, that we wanted to make sure that you felt really good about where we were. So Dr. Aberle, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're working on the premise that, you know, we hope we don't have to ever do any of this. And just thinking about the situation where you could have law enforcement here or some kind of representatives of law enforcement, and understanding like what the situation is with parents being able to be present or not. And just thinking about interpretation services, would there be interpretation services available as well?
That's a great question. And yes, you can see Dr. Lott shaking her hands. We do have several tools we can use to assist a student or their family with making sure they understand what is being shared with them.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's kind of like, is that sort of like instantly available, or is there like a lag time for that?
It is. Dr. Lutz, do you want to speak to just briefly how we utilize those services?
Sure, we have contracts with 2 different interpretation services, one strictly for people who identify as deaf or hard of hearing, and then also for multiple languages. For the multiple languages, those services are available in person, via Zoom, or over phone. The telephone is instantaneous. So if we need it in that moment, we can get somebody on the phone who can review something for us. Obviously, there's a different lag time for in-person or even Zoom. But if we really need those services, those are available to us as well.
That's very reassuring. Thank you, Dr. Lutz.
Thanks, Dr. Aberle, for the question. Mr. Jordan, I see your hand.
Yes, 2 questions. One, will it be part of your, I guess, regulation to document those who are arriving on the school campus? Like, make sure you have the name, where they're from, so on and so forth.
Yes, earlier in this document, I do believe that we have verification of the person and their purpose. And so that would all be part of it.
Okay, yeah, I know the verification. I didn't know whether you're documenting. I mean, they flash a badge. Is that, you know what I'm saying? But are you saying that, hey, we know time, where they're locating, what they're here for?
That's a great question. And yes, absolutely. We would.
I mean, I understand the warrant says that, but I mean, you know, if you understand what I mean, just for documentation purposes, in addition to
Yes.
that. And 2, with the interview, are we going to be recording the interview? Since
Typically it's a good question. Typically we have not recorded the interview, and I don't know that the officers would allow it. But I can certainly look into that with our solicitor if it's something the board would like us to explore.
yeah, the only reason is that, you know, special interpretation services, what's being asked, how it's being asked, so on and so forth. And if it's not, you know, in certain instances, of course, if they're interviewing them in a law enforcement um, office, then normally they kind of would have recorded it versus non-recorded. I was just asking if they're doing that, then we can institute, or should I say, look to do the same thing, if you follow where I'm going with that.
I can absolutely follow up with our attorney.
Yeah.
And ask if that's something we're permitted to do either by audio or video.
Yes. Okay.
I do understand the purpose in the question. Yeah.
All right. Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Of course. So documentation and recording are 2 we can follow up with our attorney.
Okay. Will do.
Okay.
Thank
Mrs. Hughley, did you have any questions?
I do not have any questions. No.
Okay. Thank you. Bryn, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I do think that this is like a great idea. I like how it covers like emergency situations, and I think it does maintain like a good relationship with police while protecting students. So I think that this is like a good policy to put forth.
Thank you, Bren. We kept in mind as we were writing this AR, the feedback that both you and Ari gave in December when we had our first policy meeting about 907, and we were discussing where you were all sharing the potential for trauma for students if they were to observe a peer be arrested on site. For example, in a physical education class or in an English classroom or in the courtyard. And so we were very mindful of what can we do to try to minimize any sort of negative impact on the general student body and on staff in the event that a student was detained. And so you guys were instrumental in quite a bit of the language in this policy. So thank you for that. Dr. Lutz or Dr. Johnson, do you think I've forgotten anything relative to our discussion of this regulation?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get some further legal guidance, and then we will implement the policy, and I'll provide you a final version of this document by email when we've gotten that feedback from our attorneys. And then we're going to be, we're implementing it immediately because the policy is approved. So this is currently the administrative regulation that's in place, and we'll modify as needed based on whatever legal updates come our way. And then this document will also be part of the content that will be in our memorandum of understanding with the Springfield Township Police Department as we move forward, because this is for all elements of law enforcement, both local, regional, state, and national. Okay, so I'll go back to the agenda. I don't think we have anybody. There are 8 persons listed, and there are 8 of us on the screen. And so I believe that we do not have need for public comment. So I'm just going to stop share for a moment. And that is the end of our agenda. Are there any other matters or topics that the policy committee would like us to be keeping an eye on as we head into the summer months? Because this will be our last policy committee meeting, unless something comes up in the next 6 weeks or so. We anticipate not needing another policy meeting this school year. So any other topics or concerns from the committee members?
Nope.
No, I do not have
None
any.
for me at this time.
Okay, and Bryn, that means this will be your last meeting as a student representative to the policy committee. So thank you very much for your participation this year. As I said just a few minutes ago, our student representatives have really helped us through some stickier situations this year with regard to policy. So you guys have been terrific. Thank you for your input and participation. And Dr. Johnson and Dr. Lutz, thanks as always. And with that, I think we can conclude the meeting. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.